Hello, dear listener. Raven here. I just wanted to say thank you for listening and tell you that the sources for all of these stories will be in the description below if you care to check them out. If you do enjoy my narration, please consider liking, subscribing, and dropping a comment. I would love to hear from you. That said, let's get this started. Here are 7 paranormal stories from Reddit. Enjoy. When I was younger, maybe between the ages of 6 and 8, I had experienced the sighting of 2 apparent ghosts. I remember one time I was woken up to what I can only assume was a loud noise, due to the fact that I was a pretty heavy sleeper and never really woke up during the night. So I woke up this night, and I turned over in the bed, and saw a little girl standing beneath my window in my room. The girl was, from what I can remember, wearing a white dress and holding a brown teddy bear. This girl also had blonde hair. At first I thought it was my sister, and so I asked her what she was doing in my room. To my surprise, the girl simply just laughed. I got freaked out, so I turned around and closed my eyes tightly. Even though I was scared, I decided to turn around again, but when I did, the girl was gone. This freaked me out even more, so I went downstairs to just sleep on the couch. This is only one such incident from when I was younger. I also used to have conversations with a man with white hair and blue eyes. I would have conversations with this man about my life and other simple things that only a young child would understand. These conversations took place over the period of around half a year. One day I went to my grandmother's house, and I saw a picture of this man on the wall. I told my grandma that this was the man with white hair and blue eyes, which caused her to freak out to the rest of the family. This was, apparently, my great-grandfather that I was talking to, who had passed away while waiting for me to be born. This story is especially important to me due to the fact that, as a young child, I had the gift of meeting my great-grandfather from beyond the grave. It all happened at Easter weekend. My mother's boyfriend, my mother, my sister, and I were all driving to my grandparents' house. While we were on the highway, it started to rain heavily, like a really huge downpour. The windshield was completely covered in big raindrops, and you couldn't see anything. Even from the backseat windows, you weren't even able to make out the road. Then, it all happened, and it happened very fast. The car started to drift from side to side 3 or 4 times, then the car overturned and flipped about 3 times. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. My mom instantly got out of the car to get my sister out. She was sitting right behind her on the passenger side. I was sitting behind the driver and I was wanting to wake him up to get him out. I could only touch his shoulder and catch a quick glimpse of his head. It was cracked open at the top of the skull. I could literally see his skull and what I thought was his brain. My mom pulled me out of the car and we waited for the ambulance to arrive. Some drivers just drove past us, but one couple did stop. They gave us blankets and an umbrella, and they waited with us. Back at home, I couldn't get any sleep at night, and I didn't know why, until I saw him. He was standing there every night in the doorway to my room and silently watching me. I could only make out the silhouette of a tall man. He was completely black. I wasn't able to make out his eyes and all the blackness, but I could feel that he was definitely staring at me. Out of fear, I snuck into my sister's room and I just slept at her feet every single night. This went on for about 4, maybe 6 months, and then it just stopped all of a sudden when my uncle took us to do yoga, the meditative type. As it stopped, I told my sister and my mother about the nights and the black man standing in my doorway. My sister just laughed it off, but my mom went as pale as she possibly could and just told me not to worry about it. 6 or 7 years later, I started a conversation with my mom about the accident and the black man. My mom told me that as the car turned over, she could feel a kind of pressure on her chest, like somebody was pressing her into her seat. Since that day, she also started to get very spiritual with angels and tarot cards and that kind of stuff. But about the black man, she said it was probably an angel watching over me, but it surely didn't feel like an angel. I have no idea who or what it was, but I haven't seen him since. I don't care if you believe me, but this is 100% exactly true. My cat got run over by a car. She died instantly. I missed her and I was devastated. That night, I dreamt of her wandering her usual places and looking confused that nobody would interact with her. I woke up uneasy. I felt like she was unable to pass on, and it was all my fault. She had loved her collar, and I took it off of her before we buried her so that she could be free. I felt maybe I shouldn't have done that, and I even debated digging her up and putting the collar back on her, but my parents told me that I was nuts. Then, I had another dream. This time I saw my granddad, who had been dead for several years by this point, sitting on a rocking chair by a fireplace. Suddenly, he stood up and walked away. The whole scene changed to him picking my cat up and her curling up against him as they walked away. They never met in real life. I got her way after he had died, but the beautiful room with the fireplace must have been his slice of heaven, and he took her there because he knew that she was lost. I just hope they're in that rocking chair by the fire, probably gossiping about me. I like to think that animals can talk on the other side. I don't know. That's all. This next story has an attached image, which I'll put up on the screen in a moment. It's titled, Unidentifiable Object Next to a Cemetery. This picture was taken a few months ago. I was hanging out in a parking lot with my now ex-boyfriend in front of a cemetery/morgue after a movie. I live in a village, and that's the only normal parking spot in the area, or so I thought. We were joking around, and he took this picture of me in the car. I'm not really sure if you can see it, or if maybe I'm just seeing things, but what is it? Honestly, it looks like a Grim Reaper to me. The other picture is the church where the first picture was taken, only on another day. The small building in front of the church is the morgue. So I'm not exactly sure if this is the right place for this, but I think it's worth posting. For some context, about a month ago, my mother was getting a knee replacement. She had been stressed about it, and I was feeling a bit stressed for her, as she worried something was going to go wrong. Also, her father was alive at the time. He was about 88 years old. He wasn't in my life, and my mother hadn't seen him in years. I'll explain how he relates to the knee replacement later. About 2 weeks before my mother's surgery, I had a dream about my grandfather passing away a day before the surgery. It wasn't a nightmare or anything. I just remember that in the dream, my mother got a phone call about his passing. I woke up and I really didn't think much of the dream. I get weird or sad dreams like that often, so no big deal. Well, that next week, my mother calls me and tells me that her father passed away in the night. He passed away on Friday in the early morning. My mother's knee surgery was on that following Monday. Immediately, I thought of that dream, although I didn't tell my mother, as I'm not really sure what she would think. So, could this have been a premonition? I have never had a dream like this before that I can recall. I had no reason to think my grandfather was going to die. He had had hip surgery not too long before his death, and I guess that is what eventually led to his passing. Although I had been under the impression that it had gone well. The only logical reason I can think of for having this dream is that I was worried about something going wrong with my mother's knee replacement. But even then, why would I dream of her father passing? If anything, I think I would dream about the surgery itself going wrong, not her father, who I haven't even seen since I was 6. What do you guys think? Was this just a coincidental connection my mind made, or a genuine premonition? My 21-year-old cousin was killed in a car crash by a drunk driver. The dream I had 2 days after his death is the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. So, as stated, my cousin was unfortunately killed by a drunk driver 2 years ago. 2 days after his death, I had a vivid dream. Myself and my cousin were in a desert surrounded by a group of friends. I couldn't put a face to any of the friends, but in the dream there was just this warm feeling that they were our friends, but nobody specific. The dream then changed to me sitting on a wooden walkway with fishing gear, waiting for my cousin to arrive, but he never showed up. The dream switched back to the desert area and there was a bus. I had this overwhelming feeling of panic that he was on the bus and that I had to stop it from leaving, but the bus left and I didn't manage to stop it. Then I looked over my shoulder and he was standing behind me with a big beaming smile on his face, and then the dream just ended. The whole time I was in this dream, a song played in the background. It was like a theme tune to the whole dream. The song was engraved in my mind relentlessly the whole next day. It was Good Riddance by Green Day. A few weeks passed and I attended his funeral. I sat down with my family, picked up the prayer card, and started to look through the pictures of him. On the front of the prayer card was a photo of him with this massive beaming smile, just like when I looked over my shoulder in the dream. We weren't very close as we grew older. He moved away and we both just had our different lives, so I didn't know any of his interest as he got older. Turns out, he was massively into fishing. Loads of pictures of him holding fish he had caught, which would explain me waiting on the lake with fishing gear for him. The strangest thing was the farewell song that was listed on the prayer card and played as everyone left the funeral. It was Green Day's Good Riddance. I spoke to my uncle afterwards and it turned out that that was his favorite song. I've been told that I'm some kind of gateway and that spirits are guided toward me, as I'm an easy route for them to make contact. I told his mom and his sister about the dream, and they all agreed that he had come to say goodbye, and perhaps I was just there to pass on the message. Last night, or this morning rather, I experienced something that I can't exactly explain. I have always approached most things paranormal with some healthy skepticism. However, as my presence on this sub suggests, I have entertained the thought that inexplicable things likely happen to us on an everyday basis, if we're paying attention. It started out as a run-of-the-mill restless night's sleep, college, relationships, and a copious amount of self-exploration and video games have truly left my sleeping schedule a wreck, to say the least. That said, waking up occasionally throughout the night is not exactly out of the ordinary for me. But last night, it was like a never-ending nightmare. Not in the sense that it was unbearable, but that every time I woke up and inevitably drifted back to sleep, I would return to the exact same dream. This went on for what seemed like hours, until I had somehow broken the chain and found myself in a different dreamscape entirely. I don't remember much of the nightmare that preceded this moment, but this part of my dream remains crystal clear to me. I woke up on the countryside, rolling hills, grassy plains, not too outlandish given that I live in a farm town in Ohio, but the setting was entirely unrecognizable. The rolling terrain stretched impossibly far, and the unnatural, hazy white light that coated the landscape made me feel uneasy. It was kind of like being inside of the moon in Majora's Mask for my fellow nerds out there. At any rate, aside from the trees that dotted the landscape, the only feature I saw was a woman standing before me. I did not recognize her. The only quality that I can specifically remember is that she was wearing a white gown of sorts. I'm hesitant to call it a dress. It almost seemed like sleeping attire, like a nightgown. I wouldn't be surprised if her clothes were from a different time period. Once I had analyzed my setting, I moved without thinking and I approached the woman. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" I spoke, not really understanding why. She seemed to regard me for a moment before replying, not looking back at me. "I can't when she's here. Sleeping lets her in." I can recall the pang of dread that hit me when she said this. I had absolutely no reason to assume anything was necessarily wrong. After all, the otherworldly quality of the world I was set in was giving me a slow realization that I was in a dream. But something was off. Something heavy in the air as soon as those words left her lips. I couldn't stop myself. "Is she here?" Without speaking another word, she simply pointed across the horizon. As I turned my head to look, my world came closing in. Instantly, my heart was full of bile. I couldn't breathe. That awful, nauseating feeling of fear and panic. My vision went blurry, my ears were ringing. The impossible sensation of a crushing weight pressing in on my head left me reeling. I didn't hear her, I didn't see her. I'm not even sure if I felt her. But whatever presence was there was definitely evil, or at least had evil intent. And then it was over. I forced myself awake, literally gasping for breath. My head rang from fatigue and something else. The dream felt so real. The pain certainly remained. My body felt sluggish, yet my mind was racing. I stumbled out of my room and made a beeline for the living room couch. It took some time and an absurd amount of bright, comforting Christmas movies, but I finally did calm myself enough to ease into a deep, dreamless sleep. Of course, I had to tell my family as soon as I saw them. I needed to say it out loud to convince myself that I wasn't alone, but this might have been a mistake. My mom, a very witty and very bubbly woman, sat in silence throughout my whole story, silently nodding or resting her hand on my shoulder in my moments of distress, but otherwise she made no comments on my experience. Afterwards, to my horror, she described to me the woman that was in my dream. At our previous house, when my sister and I were toddlers, my mom had a dream of a blonde woman in a white gown who locked herself in our room. My mom recalls pounding on the door, begging and screaming for this intruder to leave her babies alone. My dad said that he'd had that same dream that night. They bolted out of bed, busted our door open to find my sister and I sleeping soundly, just as they had left us. I can't decide if this was truly the same woman or not. I can't decide if she was truly evil or not. Perhaps the woman I was warned was something this lady in white had tried to protect me from as an infant. Maybe she came to warn me as an adult. I'm not sure. All I know is that I had to get this out here. Thank you, dear friend, for listening all the way to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please do consider giving it a thumbs up and letting me know in a comment below. If you have any thoughts on these stories, please also do let me know that as well. So, that's the end of the first video of this channel. Hopefully there are many, many more to come. But until next time, sleep well.